You're listening to Sanctum on the Paranormal UK Radio Network.
Hello, welcome. I am Kerry Ann and you are listening to Seventh Sanctum, and this evening I'm being joined with Natalie. Hello, Natalie.
I was going to say, this dark and rainy, miserable UK evening, I don't know about everybody else, but it's horrible here.
I thrive in this weather. I live for this weather.
The rain and the storm and the crows and the trees. And
Sings to my...
That was my first experience being in London at the Crime Con, and I'll tell you, I felt blessed. The weather was only bad, I think, one day.
It was really warm as well, considering the time of year. It was a really...
Well, I'll be back in June, so I'll bring you some more good weather. How's that?
Yes, please.
I'm also going to be there in June. I've already got my tickets, so I'm really excited. So we'll introduce you. William, thank you so much for joining us. Usually when we invite guests on, we like to hear a little bit about you and your journey so far. So could we just get like a bit of an overview?
Okay. Well, I'm a born and raised Chicago kid. Grew up in a very good neighborhood in Chicago. Pretty much crime-free. Went to very good high schools and college and so forth. Never thinking that I was going to be in law enforcement. I started out in marketing, and after a couple of years of that, I very quickly got tired of the same repetitive things that I was doing, and I took the police exam, and I came out of the police department in 1970. And like everyone else, I was assigned to uniform patrol, but that didn't last long, and I'm glad it didn't, because when you're in uniform, you're tied to that police radio, you're dressed in uniform and in a uniform car, and everybody sees you. Okay, I wanted to do real crime, and I was fortunate. After about a year, I was asked to go into a plainclothes tactical unit, which specialized in crimes, active crime work on the streets, gangs, narcotics, and responding to all crimes of violence. And so I went with that for the first part of my career, worked in the gang units, and then was assigned as a new detective and worked in the Area 5, which was the western part of Chicago, involved some very, very heavy crime areas, and it was my place of choice. And while in my career as a policeman, I was in a policeman from 1970, and I left the department in 1994. So I had about 25 years in. And along the way, I met some tremendously great police officers who mentored me, and I was very happy to have that association with them. But then again, like most professions, there's always some that you are a little leery of, okay? And in Chicago, having a few bad cops amongst the group, that wasn't so unusual. But I took note of it.
And I think that's quite interesting. I don't want to get too ahead of myself, actually, but you do have a new book coming out, isn't it?
Yes.
Regarding this.
Yes.
So our first time we met was at CrimeCon, which was in London. I come and got my book signed by you, the John Wayne Gacy book that you authored.
Yes. That would be Omnipotent. Don't ask, don't tell. And it's available on Amazon. Okay, and I was very happy. It sold very well at the convention, and I had a lot of people like yourself who came up with questions, and that's what I really wanted to get, that connection to you or anybody who had an interest in the case. So,
and it is a really interesting case. And before we whilst we were waiting to get on live, we were discussing about how everyday people can seem unseemly, and how actually that's one of the main components of being able to get away with things for as long as he did.
Well, yeah, and John Wayne Gacy was the most notorious serial killer in the country at the time. I mean, what happened was in 1974, I was a tactical officer and a police officer for only 4 years. My wife came home from work one day. She had been worked for an insurance company. John Gacy was running a very good construction company, remodeling, constructions, things like that. And he was very successful. And she came home one day and said, Bill, this guy, John Gacy, who does work for the insurance company, invited us over to his home. So she had never probably even mentioned his name before, but I did go with my one son at the time. And we met with John Gacy, his wife, and his second wife, and the 2 daughters he had. And we spent 5-6 hours there, and had a good time, a good meal, a lot of conversation, nothing really. Well, I'll get to that in a minute. But it's like I was telling you before. You go through life, you meet people, and at the time you meet them, there's nothing remarkable about them, And then you wake up one morning and you turn on the television set, or you pick up the newspaper and you see, oh my God, this guy's in the news. Well, John Wayne Gacy in 1978 in December is big time news, not only in Chicago, but throughout the nation, because every single day they're digging up more and more bodies from underneath his home. And there was a total of 33 bodies that were attributed to him, uncovered. Most of them uncovered underneath the home, 2 more on the property, and then 4 he dumped in a river after he was running out of space to bury them. So, who wouldn't, I had all these hours in his house where there was I had no sense that he was a killer, but that's why he was successful. Serial killers, nobody sees the evil in them. They just connect with people, and people like them, and he was well liked. He connected even in the political circle in Chicago, and he was an alderman, and he was familiar with all the politicians. He was doing work for them at their homes. How you need a little work at the house. I got a crew. We'll come out. We'll do the work. We won't even charge you. Don't worry about it. That kind of thing. So people really like John Gacy. All right. But now when he's making the news, all these politicians that had attended his parties at his house, and he had at times big yard parties with 200-300 people. I mean, I was only at his house at one time. But these other people, these politicians that were going to these big parties, after Gacy's in the news, everybody wants to distance themselves from him. So straight up denial that they knew him, most of them, afraid that they were connected to Gacy in any way. I mean, this is a notorious serial killer. But because I had been at his house, I knew him. But in the conversation we had, when you meet people for the first time and you start talking about where do you live, your education, friends, things like that. And the one question he asked me, so, well, where do you live, Bill? And I said, I live in Chicago, John, right near where 2 streets intersected. He says, really? He says, there's a building on Miami Avenue. I do the maintenance work over there. And I knew the building when he told me. It was on Miami Avenue, and it was about 2 buildings away from the apartment I was living in. And every time I would drive, we would park the car in the back. Every time I would exit from my house and drive through the alley, I'd be driving directly at the front of that building. Now, before I met him, if he had been there, I never paid any attention to him. I had no reason to. If he was there, I didn't take any notice. But after I met him at his house, he he was familiar to me. So occasionally when I'd be walking my dog or coming with the car, I see him there. And at times he had young men with him. I had brief conversations with him, you know, nothing big. We had met, had a good time at the house, but we didn't connect as friends. You know, I mean, the day that I was there for that first meeting, before I left, he invited me back to his house. He said, Bill, come on back, have a few beers. Also, I forgot to tell you, while I was at the house that night, like I said, we had dinner, we played a little pool, we sat at the bar. My wife was with his wife. He approached me and he pulled out a pair of handcuffs. And he said, can I show you a trick, Bill? And I said, John, I was in a police training academy for 6 months. Every day I had handcuffs put on me and I was putting them on other people. I know the trick, John. You have to have the key. Okay. So he took the cuffs and put them away. And then he came out with a handgun, a revolver. And he wanted to show me that. And I said, John, there's kids here. I have guns all the time. I've got a gun on me right now. I don't play with guns, and especially with children are allowed. So I said, put it away. And he did. Okay. But he invited me back to the house, said, you know, come on, stop by. We'll have a beer, watch a ball game or something, you know. And not long after that, he, we had need of some repair work done in our apartment. And the apartment owner told my wife, if you know somebody who can fix it, have them do it and send us the bill. So she approached Gacy, and Gacy came out to the house, and he brought a young boy or man with him, about 17, 18. He told him and instructed him how to do the work. And he said, I'm going to leave him here to do the work. I'll come back in a couple of hours and pick him up. And when he came back to pick up the boy, the work was done well. We had all went outside. And before he left, he invited me again to come to his house. Same thing. And I do remember shortly after that, there was an evening where I thought, well, maybe I'll go there. You know, I thought, well, maybe I'll just drive over to John's house and see what's going on. But I didn't, you know, and that might have saved my life, because who knows? He knew I was a policeman. All right. But I don't know he's a killer. All right. So if I was in his house thinking it was going to be a friendly meeting, and he suddenly pulled out that gun, I'm at a loss already. But I didn't go. And this is a little bit, we're going to talk about the paranormal. Okay. During my lifetime, I have experienced some mysterious things related to the dark side, but I've also experienced situations like where I didn't go to Gacy as maybe an intervention.
Yeah.
And see, and even before Gacy, there was another thing. Like I told you, I grew up in a great neighborhood in Chicago. I mean, we had forest preserves, rivers, golf courses, you know, a block away from me. Well, in 1955, I had two brothers, Tony and John Schuessler. Well, they were 11 or 12 and 14 years old at the time. They lived one block away from where I did, one city street. And I would go to their house often and go in the house, play. Other kids would come and play. And then one Sunday, I believe it was, I was with them and some other kids, and we were congregated around that Sunday, but I went home. All right. Later that day, the two Schuessler boys and a third boy named Peterson, who I didn't know, had gone downtown to a movie theater. And they never returned home.
Wow.
They were found a day or two later, naked and dead in a local forest preserve.
Wow.
In that case, the Schuessler-Peterson case was a notorious, well-known case. It remained unsolved until 1994. And I was present for the offender who killed those three kids on that day. My last day of work. I retired the next day. I didn't solve the case. It was actually solved by a couple ATF agents from the federal government who got information while doing something else, but they had to come to Chicago because that's where the murder case was. And of course, I knew everything about the case. So he was arrested, and later Kenny Hansen, who was one of the two offenders, got 300 years in prison and died in prison. But there was, you know, I don't know if that was an intervention. I didn't go with them to the theater, you know, but I was with them that morning. And then there's, you know, the witches thing. Okay, that's of interest. If you want to go to the dark side, this is how this goes down. I was in a gang unit at the time, and this had to be in there about 1985. And of course, being in gangs, we were interested in them because of guns and narcotics. Okay, well, we had information in the Black community. There was a Black woman, older Black woman, who was known in the community as a witch. They all said this woman has evil in her. She has these witch-like powers. And we were interested in her because the information we were receiving from informants was that she was stocking the guns and narcotics for the local gang in her home. Okay. So the gang unit that I was in, we went there to conduct a search warrant that day. And we found some guns and narcotics, the inventory. And I noticed that she had several books on witchcraft. Okay. You know, and one book in particular, it was really interesting. It appeared to be old, and it was something, the title somewhat about curses and spells. Okay. And my wife at the time, she had an interest in it, and I thought, well, you know, okay, nobody's going to miss this book amongst the books she's got. So I admit, I took that book home. And I don't even know if I said anything to my wife about it. But that evening, with the book in the house, my two sons now had gone to bed. I had gone up, say goodnight, turned off the television set in the bedroom, went downstairs to join my wife to watch television. And later that night, all of a sudden, we hear thunder, flashes of lightning, and all of a sudden the house is shaking. And I'm smelling smoke. All right. And then I run upstairs to the kids' room, and the television that I had turned on, off, is on. But as I'm watching it, it slowly fades away. But I'm smelling smoke. I had to call the fire department. And they came out, and my TV antenna on the roof had been struck by lightning. And the wires connected to it down into the house, anything connected to the TV, like the video recorders and stuff like that, they were all burned out and would have to be replaced. And I was shaken and glad that the fire department was there. And I'm telling the fire department, man, what the hell, the lightning, why is it hit my house? And the guy's going, lightning, thunder, what are you talking about? And there was no rain, but it was the lightning that hit the antenna. And I thought to myself,
when they say there wasn't any lightning then, or that they weren't aware of any?
No, none. But we were inside the house, and we had evidence from the damage. There was no doubt the antenna got hit by lightning.
So inside it sounded like there was thunder and lightning, but outside nobody was aware of anything.
We weren't running to the window to look out the window until suddenly the whole house shook and the TVs went out, except the TV upstairs.
Okay.
All right. So the fire department, the guys are looking at me like I'm a little wacko, except they can't deny that the house got hit by lightning.
Yeah. Wow.
Right? And we had to put in an insurance claim to have everything repaired. But here, it even gets a little better. And this is really wacky. And I still to this day don't know what. I took the book and I placed it into my garage where we park our two cars. Okay. I live in a great neighborhood. no crime. Okay. Next morning, wake up. Somebody had broke into my garage and they stole the radio out of my wife's car and damaged the console. All right. So I said, you know, the lightning, now I get this. I took the book and I walked down the alley to where the old Italian guy lived that was always a pain in the neck and always complaining about everything. And I threw the book in his garbage can. That night, the garbage can was on fire and part of his garage burned.
Really?
I swear.
Wow.
My wife would tell you the same thing. Unbelievable. And I thought, it's got to be this book. You know, I didn't have any proof except occurrences that can't be explained. And I didn't want anything more to do with it. But throughout my police career, you know, paranormal occurrences, things that seem unseemly or unexplained, you know, it's not something that's repeated, or I don't think a person sees often, or like you hear of haunted houses where people may be in a house and things move and stuff like that. Well, I'm not going to discredit them because I wasn't there. Okay. But I've been to a lot of homicide scenes. Okay. And I've seen everything from little children, groups of people killed in any way imaginable. Okay. It's my job of choice. It was something I was good at, and I was not disturbed by anything. But we did have a case of an elderly Polish woman who lived in a 2-flat apartment building that she owned. And the one apartment was vacant. She lived on the first floor by herself. And she was found murdered inside her apartment. All right. She had to be about 80 some years old at the time. And me and my partner got assigned to that case. And we came there. The police were already there, of course, and they had secured the scene, so forth and so on. And we went in and going about the course of our business, looking for evidence. And of course, part of your evidence is the victim, her body. Okay. So we witnessed that she had been battered about the head and killed, and she had been disrobed from the waist down. All right. And somebody had placed a red rose that came from some artificial flowers in the house on her bare back side. All right. And as we're standing there with my notepad in hand and pen in my hand, I swear to God, never ever before happened to me at any other crime scene, but I felt a hand go from one side of my shoulder and slowly drag itself across to the other side. And it freaked me out. I mean, it's like, whoa. And my partner's there. And it's not happening to him. But again, later in the same apartment while we're still there, I've got this feeling again of somebody touching me. And I've never had that before. You know? But that was the most settling. I mean, it did freak me out. Because, I mean, I've seen everything. You know, I've been involved in shootings. I've done all this other kind of police work. And I don't get unnerved very easily. But it wasn't an evil thing. It was just a presence that I assumed. And I got to say, I assumed it because there's no proof. You know, but in that one case, I believe what I felt. There was no explanation other than I'm being touched.
And I think that sometimes when we compare, you know, being able to have that experience in police work, everything's very objective, isn't it? What is can be disputed beyond doubt.
Right.
Whereas
Proof.
paranormal,
Everything.
whereas paranormal experiences are so subjective, and there's no way of measuring it either. So it's quite to be in those two, have a foot in both roles at one time, must have been a little bit discombobulating, I guess.
Well, yeah, and I mean, my partner's there, and I can, you know, John, you know, this is what you know, what the hell's going on? And he's like, yeah, right. You know, like, you You know, what are you talking about? But it's never happened to me at any other location.
No.
And like I say, and I've been in all kinds of homicide cases, but this is the only one I can really say that I was touched while I was there. So much so that I'll never forget it. You know, and then the other thing about paranormal, I don't really know. I mean, I think it's sort of like there can be good side and a bad side to it. And like I told you, when I didn't go back to Gacy's house, I think I was lucky I didn't go. But I was ready to go, you know,
Yeah.
and I didn't.
And
But
and just to ask a question, when you talk about John Wayne Gacy's kind of he really kind of I think what I'm trying to say is he made some bold moves in showing and sharing some experiences or things that he had and inviting police officers and politicians and to his home and to go to their home. Do you think that was part of that part of the thrill for him, without a better choice of word?
Sure. There's a power to knowing you, only you knowing what's going on. I mean, serial killers will admit to homicides and things like that when they know you know. Okay. But part of their game is, and part of their victory is, I'm not going to tell you what I know. You have to figure it out. Just like when he was asked by one of the Des Plaines policemen at the time of his arrest, John, you know, are there more bodies? Where are they buried? And John said to him, quite frankly, well, that's your job to find them. You know, but once they did identify the bodies that were being pulled out, yeah, he would admit to either killing there or having a connection to them, but he would also blame it on his accomplices. Okay. And part of the problem for the city of Chicago back in the 70s, and you can see that even today repeating itself in almost any city, when you have a guy like John Gacy who started killing in about 1972, all right, and he's not arrested until December of 78, the public wanted to know, how did this guy continue for so long? All these kids are going missing, and you, the police, aren't connecting anything. But things were different at that time. There were no computers. In Chicago, being the large city that it is, was broken. The police were broken up into 5 different areas. You know, so without the computers, if you were in one area, you didn't know what was going on in the other 4. Okay, so Gacy was able to get away with it. But they get a superiority thing to them. They don't want to admit. They don't want to tell you. You find out. You know, and that's why we still have, I think it's 5 bodies that have not yet been identified. Okay, but I'm working to identify, and I believe I have connection to 2 more victims and 2 possible accomplices that I'm working on at this time. Hopefully we'll have an answer to that within the next couple of months. But I've been instrumental in trying to get the police to check out the building on Miami that Gacy was in charge of. And the reason is, like I said, I met him in 74, and I'm sure of that because my wife was pregnant with my second son, who wasn't born until April of 74. And after I had met him, of course, at that house that one time, and recognizing and knowing his connection to that building, one evening about 3 a.m., I'm driving and I have to turn down Miami Avenue and go past that building to turn into my alley behind my apartment. And as I turned onto Miami Avenue, on my left side, walking out between 2 parked cars, is John Gacy. And he's carrying a long spaded shovel. Not a garden hose, not a bag of groceries, but exactly the tool you would need to dig graves. Okay. And because I recognized him, I stopped the car immediately. And I said, John, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. What the hell are you doing here? I know he doesn't live there, but I know he works at the building. And he laughingly said, well, Bill, you know, not enough hours in a day. You got to get it done when you can. And I went home. He laughed, I laughed, I went home. Thought nothing of it until years later when my wife calls me up and says, hey, turn on the television. John Gacy's just been arrested for murder. And then because I remember the incident, and the police at the time were, of course, trying to recover all the victims of Gacy. So they were asking the public for help. And I, being a Chicago police officer, understood that the case was being handled not by Des Plaines police, who started the investigation, but it was taken over by the Cook County Sheriff's Department. So I called them and I told them about the incident where I saw Gacy with the shovel at 3 o'clock in the morning. And I told them about the incident. I told the guy I talked to, I said, listen, I'm a policeman for Chicago. I think maybe you should go over to that building and talk to the people who live there or lived there at that time and see what they have to say. And the guy I'm talking to me says, well, Dorsch, you know, we got enough bodies. We don't want any more. Well, what else can you do? I don't work for them, but I gave them the information. And I found out later, years later, that they never did go to that building to talk to people, even though other people, including a policeman friend of mine who lived in the basement apartment, also had called to report it at the time of Gacy's arrest. And he was told basically the same thing. We don't want any more bodies. And that apartment that this policeman lived in the building was an apartment that I had often gone to. And because he was a friend of mine and he was a policeman who worked in the same district I did. And so when this policeman and his family moved out of that apartment into their very first home, I helped them move out. And after he moved out, John Wayne Gacy's mother moved into that apartment, which gives you even a stronger connection to that property and Gacy. But now we have a total of 33 bodies, but I have information from a radar scan that was done that there was evidence of possibly more bodies buried at that location, and the city of Chicago doesn't want to do anything about it.
And there's a lot of this in your book, isn't it? The one that we referenced when we first started. Natalie, I've been reading it over the space of 4 weeks. I've been taking it in. However, Natalie absolutely smashed through the book. And I'm sure, Natalie, have you got any questions?
Yeah, please.
Not questions so much, but I just find it kind of sad, actually. You know, like sad for the when reading through your book, I find it quite interesting, like you say, that how many things that could have caught him sooner got missed because they weren't followed up on. That's what tragic at perhaps
right, and that's in the book too. So much of that evidence is in the book. I mean, you got to think. I'm a police investigator, but you don't have to be an investigator to think. You got a guy that's hiring young people, okay, to work for him. And now they're digging up bodies of all these young people under the house and other locations. Surely one of the first things you want to do is find out everybody that ever worked for him to find out, are they still alive? Or are they missing? Or have they been talked to? And what I found out was they didn't check on anybody. And one of those people that is an accomplice of Gacy, I believe, had a prior homicide arrest. Now, if you're the investigator and you're going through the list of employees, which the police did have, and you would be checking everybody for their background, and you would want to talk to everybody on that list. But certainly you're going to be going to a guy who's got a prior homicide arrest. But they didn't talk to these people.
I was going to say, that's the thing that got me. It's like, yeah, it was pretty cut and dried that Gacy was the main murderer, but to have accomplices, I mean, if you're not interested in catching them and putting them behind bars, what's to stop them? You know, if Gacy took ideas from a previous serial killer, what's to stop them from going on and doing the same thing themselves?
That's a great question. He learned from Corell a lot, all right, from Corell's arrest. But the thing about Gacy is, excuse me, I'm trying to get my thought together here. Your question again is about what? What was your question? Okay.
So Natalie's
Okay.
yeah. I think for Natalie, I think what Natalie was asking was John Wayne Gacy learned a lot from previous serial killers, and if he's working alongside other accomplices and they haven't been captured or held accountable, then what's to say they're not doing?
I'll take you there. I found a very good reason why. See, what happened is when Gacy got arrested, and if you read the book, you will understand that the case ended with the arrest of Gacy. That should have been the beginning of the investigation with Gacy. Okay? Because Gacy was connecting with others to commit these crimes. And there was one of the people who was one of his accomplices. There were two main people that were involved in this case. A boy named David Cram, who was about 19 or 20, who not only lived and worked with Gacy and brought kids back to Gacy, and a guy named Michael Rossi, who was about 19 at the time also, who did the same, lived with Gacy for a period of time. Both of them were having sex with Gacy. And I believe that's the control thing. Once they admittedly had sex with Gacy, he would use that against them. And they were brought into the same web with him. Okay. But Dean Cram committed suicide years later. Michael Rossi and Cram were believed to be involved with Gacy at the time of Gacy's arrest. But they were in custody even, all right, at the time of Gacy's arrest. But what I learned from Joe Kozenczak, who was a lieutenant from Des Plaines Police Department, they were in charge of the original investigation of Gacy and a missing boy. And it was through them that they uncovered the first bodies. And then Sheriff's Department took it over. But what they found out was, well, when I talked to Joe Kozenczak, who headed the investigation, we sat down, we had like 3 meetings, but he told me, because I said, why, it seems like these guys were involved. Why weren't they charged? That was my question. He says, well, Bill, one day, the day we had them in custody, thinking about charging them, suddenly a woman came into our offices yelling about, where's my son, Michael? All right. So that he went out with the state's attorney. They both went out and talked to the woman. And she told them, do you have my son, Michael Rossi, here? And they said, yes, ma'am, we have him here and he's in serious trouble. And she says, well, let me tell you this. If you do not release my son, Michael, now, you will not have a job tomorrow. That's a pretty brazen thing to threaten people with. I'll tell you, I probably have heard that too during my police career several times. But Kozenczak told me, he says, well, the obvious things, how he responded. He said, what are you talking about, lady? She says, my son, Michael, is the grandson of Vito Marzullo. And if you don't think I can take your job from you, you're wrong. Well, Vito Marzullo at that time was the second most powerful politician in the city of Chicago. So his grandson, Michael Rossi, who is a suspected accomplice of Gacy, went from being an accomplice to a witness against Gacy and was never charged. But they had to do the same for David Cram, even though Cram didn't have that connection, but they couldn't just let Rossi go and not Cram. So they used both of them as witnesses against Gacy.
And I think this is a good kind of place to kind of flow into your next book, because you talk a lot about corruption and police corruption, and you'll obviously be able to explain the book a lot better than me, so I'll hand over to you. But there's also a recent article that we'll share that you shared with me earlier, William, regarding the arrests and the releases of wrongly accused men.
Right. Before, I want to tell you another brief story, and this one is very personal to me about the paranormal. Okay. I was blessed with having great parents. My father was a World War II veteran. He lost his right arm at in the invasion of Leyte in the Philippines. He lost his arm right about at the shoulder. Great man, never complained about anything, had no enemies. All right. I was blessed. Well, when my father died in his 70s, and I remarried, I was remarried again, and my wife was from Europe, and I started going to Europe, and I was always telling her about my father would always tell me how much he wanted all his life to go to Italy and Greece. He wanted to go to the Mediterranean. He says, and my luck was, where did they do it? They sent me to the Philippines. Okay. But he read everything about it. He read constantly about the history of Rome and Greece. And, and so he had a ID badge from when he was after the military, he worked for the U.S. Treasury Department. Okay. And his ID badge had his photo and name on it. And I had that badge, and I had it since he died. And I kept telling my wife, who was from Bulgaria, and I had been coming to Bulgaria every year now, and we were going to go to Greece, and we were going to obviously go to the beach, to this and that. So I had always told her, when I get to the Mediterranean, I'm going to take that ID that he's got, and I'm going to bury it in the sand. My dad, you got here. And she talked me out of it. She said, no, it's too personal a thing. We'll go there. Just, you can think about your dad, but keep it. It's a memento that your dad would want you to have. So we went to Greece. So my wife was at the door. Later. Excuse me, just 1 second. Yes, dear. What? I'm on the air.
Okay, Ivan is looking for you because he broke the phone.
Tell him it's all right. Just tell him it's all right.
I can't reach him.
Well, I'll call later.
And I can take us to Sofia tomorrow, maybe.
Yeah. Okay. It's a young man that helps me out with my computers is trying to reach me. A great kid. Okay. But anyway, we go to Greece for the very first trip. Put our bags in the hotel room. We grab our blankets and stuff and chairs, and we walk down to the sand. We put the stuff down on the sand. The chairs are set up. The blankets are set up. And I'm walking in my swimsuit to the water. And I'm just about at the water, and I stopped. And I turned to my left, and walking towards me in a group of maybe 3-4 people was a man who was about the age of my father when he died. Similar thin build and the hair and face, not looking like my dad, but the physical structure characteristics. And he's missing his right arm at the shoulder. And he walked within feet of me. And I froze. And I turned. And then I looked at my wife. And my wife was looking at him too, at me. And I walked over to her and I said, did you see that? And she said, yes. And I swear to God, we both looked and we didn't see him anymore in the group.
Wow.
And
so he got there then.
That's what I said. He got me.
Yeah. Wow.
And it was a good thing. It was a good thing. I mean, I couldn't believe it, but that was the thing. That's why I mentioned to you, I think there's a good side to it and a bad side to the paranormal, but he wanted me to know. And that's the way I felt.
Yeah, it sounds like it. It's like, say, the fact that your wife saw him as well. It's
yes.
also, Yes.
And then we both saw that he was not there anymore.
Yeah. No, it's crazy how things like that happen. And like you say, when somebody else sees it as well, you can't really doubt it the same way because you're like, well, we both
and because we shared the whole venture, I guess maybe that's why she was part of it.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, it was like a message to both of you in a way. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, let me get on to Guevara. Okay. Like I started earlier, being a Chicago policeman, I love the job. Okay. Being a homicide detective, I really, I thought I was good at what I did. Okay. But I worked with a lot of very good police officers, great police officers. I mean, during my career, I think, what is it? I think there were 82 police officers in Chicago that were killed in duty. Okay. So it's a risky job. I had my own shootings and I survived them. Okay. But in the police department, and this started even before I became a policeman. When I was thinking about being a policeman, my father's uncle, who had been a career Chicago policeman, owned a resort in northern Wisconsin. He and I was up there with friends, and I told him I was going to go on the police department. He said, here's a beer. Sit down. I want to tell you something. He said, this is very important. You should know this. Be careful on the police department. Pick good partners, because not all of them are there for the same reason you are. Okay. And that was good advice. All right. So, I mean, during my career, I learned every day. You know, maybe I saw what was good or saw something that was bad, but I didn't repeat anything that was bad. And I stayed away from the trouble guys, the guys that I thought, you know, you might have a suspicion about them, but you thought that was enough to not want to work with them. But when I was a detective at Area 5 in 1994, well, that's when I retired. But the problem was in the 90s, we had so many homicides, and Chicago was known as the murder capital of the United States. Okay, and there's one thing about homicides: you can't stop them. You can't put a policeman on every corner. The homicides are going to happen, but according to the people who run the city, you got to solve cases, because it looks real bad if you're getting 930 murders and you're not solving cases. So you got to make arrests. And so I believe it was in my book, people will find out, there was sort of like a trade-off. There was a group of policemen coming mostly out of the 14th district and gang crimes that were putting homicide cases on people who were innocent and sending these people to prison on false evidence. And they were in prison for 20, 25 years and more before they were out. Okay. One of them, Joe Majanowski, who I knew from gang unit, he's serving life in prison in a federal penitentiary, convicted of his involvement with the gangs. Because what they were doing is they were intimidating the gangs, and they were telling the gangs, you're going to cooperate with us and you're going to pay us from your narcotic sales, and we'll give you protection for that. Okay. So they were getting money from these gangs, but the way they were bringing the gangs in, you know, these gangs, they didn't want to jump in there with the police. They didn't want to do that. Excuse me. I got the young man here right now. 1 second. Come on, Ivan, go ahead. Oh, no, turn. I'm doing my podcast right now.
Oh, so everything's okay.
I'm in the middle of it. I'll call you tomorrow, but everything's okay.
I'm so sorry. I just
No, go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. I am blessed here in Greece and Bulgaria. My Bulgarian and the Cyrillic alphabet are not good for me. Okay. But most of these young people here, they're multilingual. And so many of them, the vast majority of them speak English. And most of them are so good with computers. And that's where I really need them. So I'm blessed to have a guy like this who takes enough time out of his busy night to come see if I'm doing okay. So I'm happy with that, you know. But getting back to this, what was going on with them, they were able to, they would go to a gang that they wanted to get money from and control, all right, and tell them, you give us money or you're going to have trouble. So what they would do is they would send a message to the gang leaders, and they would there would be a homicide, and then they would pick out somebody from that gang and put a false case against them with false witnesses, get them convicted and send them to prison. That would force the gang to say, oh, we better join with these guys or we're going to go down. And that was going on for years. Okay. Well, in 1990, when I was a detective, I was aware of this group and I was suspicious of what they were doing with no real proof. But then one evening, we had a homicide that was maybe a month or 6 weeks old. Are we running out of time here, girls?
We have about 5 minutes, so it'd be great to know where I know we'll be leaving on a bit of a cliffhanger, but it'd be great to know because this book hasn't been released yet, has it? So it'd be
No, it
great to know about the release dates and where everyone can find your books as it stands, and also your podcast that we haven't even mentioned yet. So where they'll be able to find you otherwise.
Well, I've been working with Bob Mata on his Defense Diaries podcast. And unfortunately, I was doing that for a very long time. We have a lot of episodes up online about Gacy and now my second book. But unfortunately, Bob ran off to be involved in a more recent homicide trial. And we haven't been able to connect for about 5 weeks because of his involvement. You know, he's in the podcast business and he's got to keep these people rolling, you know, so I understand it. But whether we'll reconnect or not, I don't know. But let me get back to what happened. I'll try to be as quick as I can with Guevara and company, because he was not alone. Reynaldo Guevara was a gang crimes officer who came into our office one evening with 2 young boys, about 15 years old, who we said were witnesses to this older homicide, which we had no clue in the world. The only thing we knew from the witness in the car, a young girl, was that the occupants who were the shooters were in a large white car. Nothing else. And suddenly he appears with 2 witnesses. And he tells our boss that the 2 kids were close enough to the homicide shooting that they were able to write down the license plate number of the car and they can identify the people in the car. Well, that's great news. But my boss says, Bill, you know, pick it up. But when I'm first of all, I'm saying, wait a minute. You're telling me that these 2 kids at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning are witness to this homicide, and they're so close to it that they had a piece of paper and a pen on them and they wrote down the license plate number. And now 4 to 6 weeks later, when these 2 gang crimes officers stopped them, one of them still has that piece of paper in his pocket. I don't believe it. They never talked to the police. But the guy, I was told to follow it up, and I ran the plate, found out who owned the car, found out that that young man that owned the car did have a gun arrest. Okay. So, yeah, kind of have to get a picture of him. And I sent Guevara and his partner down to headquarters to get the photo, and I keep the boys with me. When Guevara comes back, he wants to take the photo right into the boys, and I stopped him. I said, no, give the photo to me. And I grabbed a group of other photos, put them together, and took the boys, and Guevara and his partner came into the room also. And before I showed the boys the photos, I said, listen, you said you saw the homicide and you're close enough. You're going to look at some photos, but just because you're looking at photos, it doesn't mean that the people you saw are in these photos. So don't pick out somebody. I don't want you to try to make me happy. I only want you to identify someone if that's the person you saw. If not, it's not them. Don't worry about it. So I called one kid up to look at the 5 or 6 photos, and he's not picking anybody out of it, Carrie. And then after a little bit of time, Guevara reaches out and puts his finger right on one of the photos. And the kid goes, oh, yeah, that's him. That's him. I was going to say it was him, but maybe the hair or something looks a little different. And I said right away, Guevara, get out. And I told the kid to get out. That was a mistake. I should have separated them, but I sent them both out together. I mixed up the photos, had the second kid come up, and he looks at the photos. He can't identify anybody. All right. So anyway, I've got one identification that I don't like. And my boss tells me, call the state's attorney. And of course, when the state's attorney comes down and I tell him what happened, he says, you have one identification. We need a lineup. So we did a lineup the next day, and I'm rushing through this now. We did a lineup the next day. And of course, the kid that had the photo pointed out to him, he can pick the guy out of the lineup. And the second kid can't. All right. But the state's attorney says, well, we got one ID, charge him. So we take the kid down to the lockup and put him in a lockup to be processed and go to court. And the father of the boy comes into the station looking for his son because he learned we had taken his son in to talk to him. And he said, you know, my son, what, murder? He's a good kid. He works at a grocery store, a drugstore, and he goes to night school. He's not in a gang. I said, but sir, he's got a gun arrest. How did that happen? And he said, well, talk to my son. Well, I talked to the kid and I verified it later through policemen and other things. He had found a gun in the alley and he thought because of other kids, I'm not going to leave it here. He threw it in the trunk of his car and later got stopped by the police and they found the gun. All right. So he got charged. But anyway, now I didn't like the way the identification went down. And I told the father, just go to court tomorrow. We have to pick up the 2 boy witnesses and I'm going to pick them up without the 2 policemen. And I'm going to talk to them again. And when I met with the boys, I told them, picked up one right away, the one that made the identification. I said, listen, I don't like it the way this went down. I don't believe any of it. I don't believe you had a piece of paper and pen. I don't believe you still had the paper on you when you got stopped by the police. Something's wrong. Do you really want to put an innocent person in jail for murder for something he didn't do? And the kids said, we weren't there. We never saw it. But we're afraid of these policemen. And they told us they needed our help in a homicide case. And they told us they needed us to help them. So he says, we did what we did. And they paid us $20 a piece for doing it. And the other kid verified the same thing. So anyway, I took the 2 boys down to the court for the first appearance of this kid, who we arrested the night before. I told the state's attorneys what happened. They talked to the 2 kids and they said, we're going to release them from court. Took the 2 boys home. And I had to get the guy out that night because after that first appearance, he was going to be stuck in jail for years until this was the hearings, you know. But I got him released. I came back to my office and waiting for me was my boss and other supervisors. And the first words out of their mouth were, Dorsch, what the frick are you doing? We're never going to solve this case. So I said, so you want me to put an innocent kid in jail for murder he didn't do so you can clear a homicide? And I was ordered not to write any reports. And after that, a few years later, after watching what was still going on and trying to avoid all the connection to these bad cops, I left the police department. I could have stayed another 12, 13 years, but I left. And years later, doing my work as a private investigator and connecting with the Innocence Projects, I told them about this. And through my testimony in civil and federal courts, I've now helped to get over 40 people exonerated who were all in jail for murders. So
amazing. And this journey has all been documented in your book, isn't it? So when does your book get released?
It will be out. The exact date, I'm not sure. I'm not finishing the editing right now, but I'm hoping for January, end of January.
Okay. Well, once it's published, we'll make sure to share it. And we've come to the end of the podcast. Thank you so much for telling us all about your experiences in your journeys, paranormal and otherwise. It's been really interesting. Thank you.
It was indeed a pleasure. Natalie, Gary, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was very interesting. Thank you.
In the future, we'll meet again, I hope, maybe in June.
In June, I'll be there with bells on, and I'll have a copy of the book. Your next book.
I'm hoping to get to fill you in. I'm trying to get a presentation on the stage.
That'd be fantastic.
For both Gacy and for the Guevara cases. And with the Guevara cases, I'm going to bring in a fantastic attorney who I've worked with to get these kids exonerated, and a film producer who I've worked with for 6 years, who's going to have a documentary coming out on it.
Perfect. I'll be at the front row. I'll be there watching. Thank you.
All right.
Well, we're going to say thank you for everyone that's joined us this evening. Thank you for listening.
Yes. Good night, all.
And good night. Thank you.
And I love London. I can't wait to go back.
Oh, we can't wait to have you back.
Okay. We'll see you then. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.